thank you for inviting me to the 2022 Emerging Market Open Forum. It's great to be with you. I'm excited to spend some time with you talking about some of the global game industry trends in open source. So one of the questions that always comes around is in regards to open source technologies in the game industry. But it's kind of interesting because most game companies don't realize how much open source they actually use. And it's really important for game studios to actually understand that there are so many benefits and so many things out there that are already available to them. And using open source technologies, especially ones in the Open3D engine, help them actually complete things without having to reinvent the wheel. This means more time is actually spent developing the game, spent more time developing different types of mechanics and elements that are behind it, instead of trying to build some of the basic fundamentals. Even if there's a commercial project that's involved, a lot of times a newer technology can be adopted from an open source type of platform. So consider open source as part of your ecosystem. The other problem is that if you're looking at it from the perspective of cost, think about the amount of time you have to get in support for somebody to understand and build. Whereas in an open source community, you have a lot of the people that have already built or had experience with these type of components that can actually help you bring them across the finish line. That is a cornerstone of the Open3D Foundation, is really the community. It's having people who may develop games or simulation or AI, but have dealt with a lot of the same scenarios, who can actually sit down and help you actually build some of these pieces and do some of the things you want to do. So there are a tremendous number of benefits of not only just using open source, but also saving time when it comes to working with the open source community. One other thing to think about is that people think, well, only really big game companies can get involved with open source. Or really, how can a smaller studio take advantage of this and really find it to their benefit? But that's the key, is that even as a small or a medium-sized game studio, you're working with many people in much larger companies, same size, or smaller companies. It's not about the size of your organization. It's about the size of the community as a whole. Because the more number of engineers that belong to that community, those are the ones that are actually helping you accomplish your goals. This is why contributing to an open source community, such as the Open3D engine, the Open3D Foundation, is a really big part of how you can cut some of your costs, cut some of your time, and be able to produce a better game and a better result. You may find that people really do like to share their work, especially if it's not anything that's earth-shaking or anything that's so incredibly new and novel that has to be protected by intellectual property. Most of the time in a game, the intellectual property is the story, the art, maybe some of the mechanics, but most of those mechanics we've seen in other games. So there's not a lot of uniqueness there. But why would you want to spend the time to actually figure out how to rebuild those same mechanics when you could actually work with a community or work with others who have built them that may turn around and contribute that code to you? And then from the turnaround, if you look at it, if you've already built it and it's novelty, you don't see anything special to it, you can contribute that back into the community or even talk about it in dev blogs. You would be amazed that the more you share, the more information you give into an open source community, the more that you can get back out of it. People will turn around and take your work. They will build derivatives. They'll turn around and build different ideas and then publish those back out of the community. And there's a lot of ways where you can do that, where perhaps you want to contribute it, but you don't want somebody to actually build something commercially off of there, but you want to show the world and teach the world. There are different licensing models that allow you to do that, especially with artwork and things like Creative Commons non-commercial, and then of course for code itself, you really want to use something like Apache licensing so that when you put it out to the world, people can learn from it, they can use it, and they can share back to you. You would be surprised at how much benefit there is when you work with an open source community and you look at the collective of knowledge of engineers. Even if you don't have 25-year veterans on your team, you can still wind up working with or getting contributions from these same veterans that are at other companies and organizations. Now, let's start by thinking about where will we use some of these open source technologies. And specifically, I want to talk about 3D. So, if you think about a lot of things that are happening, we've lived in a 2D world, but we see things in 3D every day. And the world is moving faster and faster towards 3D technologies because of a lot of the hardware and software that's involved to make it much easier to do that. And open source really moving into that environment is a natural progression that really we're looking forward to have so much different innovation occur. And so if you think about it, the Open3D engine really has the opportunity to do for open source 3D what Linux did for operating systems. Imagine that. You're talking about a 3D engine that can be used anywhere, that's Apache licensed, that has an entire community that are continuously building on this. Many companies, many individuals that are making it bigger and better. And for the longest time, people thought, oh, Linux will never make it. But let's face it, most of our servers are now running on Linux, and a lot of desktops and platforms are running off of Linux. I mean, if you look at even spin-offs like SteamOS using a Linux core for a gaming console. So really, if you look at the capability of what open source can do, having an actual true AAA class 3D engine that is open source for the world has a tremendous amount of opportunity for people to take advantage and for growth. So if you look at the community behind this, which is really crucial, we have a lot of different partners that are involved, such as Adobe and AWS. We even have Epic Games. If some of you are familiar with Unreal, you would think, well, why is a competing engine, contributing? But the reality is that we're not competing. Is that we're actually working together to create some of the open standards so that people can move between the different engines. So if they build something in open source and they find technologies that are in Unreal they want to use, that they can do that. They can work with Epic. They can work with an open source engine. So it's really that understanding and belief that open source and commercial working closely together is critical. And the other companies like Intel and Huawei, Lightspeed, Oppo, Microsoft, these are some of the major partners that have been involved here that are really pushing and driving on making sure that this 3D engine is very well supported and grows continually. So really, thanks to all of the collaboration that we have, and for many others around the globe, we're on an incredible, incredible path. And the whole thing is that we're building this world's first high-fidelity, full-feature, real-time open-source 3D engine that's available to every industry. Take note of that. It's for every industry. It's not just for games. The best part about having something like this is being able to mix and match what fits your environment. But at the end of the day, really, together as a community, it's an amazing journey. But that's the whole thing. We will only really get there as a community, and just seeing some of the exciting accomplishments along the way is what will drive us as a whole. So some of the key accomplishments, let's think about it since we've started out here, okay? We have a Discord server and an active community that has people that can chat continuously. But there are over 500 active online participants. So when you drop into one of these, you can ask questions, get answers incredibly fast. Support is key when it comes to these different type of communities. But we have over 200 authors of code that are involved, and over 8 million changes to the lines of code since we've done this about 16 months ago, since we've started. And that's also come down to a 70% increase in total commits across the board. And so if you think about that, the number of stars and forks and different people in the repository, a lot of people are looking, a lot of people are playing with. So just because their logos aren't up on our site doesn't mean that they're not involved, because we found out they very much are. And so having that kind of diversity inside of the leaders is important. Companies like Red Hat and Huawei that are actually leading SIG simulation and SIG audio graphics. This means that if you want to be involved, it's a duocracy. You just need to simply get involved, contribute, be a part of it. When elections come up, state your case. Say, listen, I want to help lead this community, and here's some of the contributions. Become a leader. Help drive the change, because that's part of how open source works. It's not just where you have to wait until the roadmap comes out and then we're all going to go in this one direction. You have the ability of putting your hands on the steering wheel just by getting involved. And that means you don't have to be a company. You can be a student, you can be a corporation, you can be a university. Really, as I said, it is a duocracy. People who do things actually wind up becoming the ones that drive this forward. Now, remember I brought up the point about having kind of forks and keys and things like that? Well, these are actually some of the companies that we see, such as AWS, Baidu, Google, ByteDance, Ubisoft, NetEase, Tencent, Microsoft. So the funny thing is, even though they're not directly involved with us, and some are, but others that are not may be looking closely at us, because we can see that they're forking the repo. We can see that they're actually they're contributing issues. They're contributing code blocks. So even though they're not formally sponsoring us, they are a part of the community and they're helping this grow. So it's always a much bigger community than what you actually see. And we're able to get a lot of this data from what we see just from GitHub. So let's talk about a minute here, one of the really important pieces, which is modularity. So modularity is really a key element when we talk about the Open3D engine, because not every scenario fits. In other words, if I'm doing a simulation in, let's just say, water fluid simulation, okay? Do I really need to have a character that can move around freely? Do I need the full animation suite? Do I need gun physics? Do I need, different elements that aren't really required for me to do water fluid dynamics? Modularity is what allows you to turn those things off. So in other words, I can trim this down to the smallest possible system that I need without having to have all these dependencies or have to actually unwind them. I don't have to turn around and find what code and what dependencies are tied in. I can literally just shut these gems off. And every part of the system is a gem. The core, the physics, even the renderer. If you decide that you don't like the renderer and you want to write a new one or make a duplicate of the current renderer and make a new one out of it, you can, and you can shut the old one off. We've had projects where we've seen open source ray tracing, software-based renderers be built where that is the actual renderer and we shut the original hardware or atom renderer off. So keep in mind that when we talk about modularity, it's everything is modular. And that allows you to work with all these pieces, and it allows it to be much more interoperable and allows you to do more things for cross-platform. So this means being able to support not just Windows, but Linux, Android, iOS, Mac, really any kind of platform that has like a mobile device or even in some case consoles. So it's one of those things that you can keep building on and really determine what you want to do and how you want it to work. So let's take a minute to hear from Brian Shea, Chief Strategy Officer over at Huawei, just kind of, how his team is contributing to Open3D and why modularity is such an important aspect for them.
Hi, my name is Brian Shea, and I'm Chief Strategy Officer at Huawei. Yeah, Huawei's been doing quite a lot in the Open3D Foundation, and we were one of the founding members of the foundation as well. So a few of the things that we've been focused on, for example, we've taken a very strong focus on simulations. Simulations are one of the key ways in terms of how do you actually take the 3D objects and items that you're rendering, but turn them into things that you can actually interact with so that they reflect behaviors that you would see in the real world. Another very key way that we've been investing in, this is a newer area, is around the mobile space. So we're kicking off with other partners within the community. How do we really start to bring Open3D into the mobile space and start to bring it across different phones and other mobile devices. And then a third area is how do we start to build a lot of the cross-community cooperations with Open3D and other areas. We believe that standardization is also going to be really key as we take a look at the metaverse. How do we make sure that different assets are interoperable and exchangeable from one environment to another. In Open3D, because we're building a lot of the key technologies in open source, we think that bringing this as well as a lot of the standardization efforts that are going on together will really help things be able to interoperate and be able to build together these very, very large environments where everything needs to fit together. We fundamentally believe that, as we go forward, there's very few industries that actually will not be impacted by 3D. And so this goes back to one of the reasons that we joined, the Open3D Foundation is the opportunity for 3D. We believe that open source is, really important and probably one of the best ways in terms of driving cooperation and collaboration to bring these kinds of technologies forward. I'd also add that it's important not just to have open source, but to also have open governance around this project. This is another really important reason for the Open3D Foundation is that not only is the source code open for anyone to use and to bring forward, but there's also a very good cooperation model in place in terms of how do the companies come together, how do we work together, and how do we push this forward, both amongst ourselves, but also with other communities, all focused on the broader metaverse space. And so for us, open source and the way that we cooperate and the way that we need to bring everything together, this is a really, really key way in terms of how do we advance the state of the art.
So the next part of this really is about interoperability. If you think about it, it's a key element that I have to be able to bring assets and objects and code, things from different places into this environment, or it's not very useful. And so part of being open source is being able to work with different formats like FBX and GLTF and USD. And so by having a lot of these different formats supported, it allows you to take different types of assets that you might find on the internet or you might generate through other programs like, say, Blender or Maya or any of the Autodesk's products. Being able to bring them in and work with them is a key critical component. And having that kind of interoperability that lets you go in and out of that is a big part of the Open3D engine, because that's what will allow you to kind of unleash the creativity of different artists and content creators around the globe. So let's take a moment here to listen to Mark Petit from Epic Games. Mark Petit is the Vice President of the Unreal Engine ecosystem, and really how he thinks about the way his team is contributing to Open3D and why interoperability is such an important aspect of enabling our future.
Hello, everybody. My name is Mark Petit. I'm from Epic Games, where I run the Unreal Engine ecosystem. It's been a pleasure over the past few years to see how Unreal Engine has been adopted not only in video games development, but in other industries and all kind of immersive interactive experiences on top of video games. For me, what's been fascinating over the past 6 years at Epic is to see the rise of real time, so that we can actually say today that, we can do in real time pretty much everything. So Epic joined the Open3D Foundation because we see a world where the metaverse or the next generation of the internet will have to be about open standards and will have to be about interoperability. So I think when Royal called me, I thought it made a lot of sense for Epic to join and work with one of the most important open source project out there, Open3D, and make sure that we walk the talk and understand how we build that element of interoperability. One of the things we wanted to achieve by joining the Open3D Foundation is understand how we enable that mixing and matching of different software stacks to the profits of the game developers and the real-time developers around the world. So what I'm excited about the future is getting to the ultimate promise, real-time 3D, which is co-presence, which is having, the ability to do things with people without being with people. And that's probably going to take a lot of hardware, maybe some elements of what's currently known in VR. But I think I'm looking forward for times where, I can be with people and feel I'm with people virtually. And I think that's, for me, going to be the killer app of everything we do, is that ability to have fun, to work, to collaborate online as real humans. What I would like to share with people today is the more we have a sense shared of timing, I think the better we'll be able to work together. I think, it's very important that we come together in places like the Open3D Foundation, in other places like the Metaverse Standards Forum, and get ourselves involved in defining platforms, and that will be utterly important for ourselves and our kids in the future. It's time for us to take charge, show leadership, and create those platforms the way we want them to be.
Now, we think about with 3D engines, we have to think about the different interfaces that are involved, because it's not just really, where we have a web browser and everything is done that way, but it's really important to remember that the way that an engine works with their interfaces is critical, because that's how we actually communicate with it. And whether it's AR, VR, MR, mobile devices, PCs, there's just a total complexity that surrounds how these get involved. And because they have different approaches and different ways that they communicate, it's critical to understanding how this is done, at least so that you can get a simplistic goal that can be achieved. And so let's think about some of the different interfaces that are involved here, such as virtual reality. Think about it. You've got VR, which is a 3D interface that's usually stereoscopic, where you're seeing depth and involvement. You move your head around, you can see different things. And so you're tracking a lot of environments, but having that kind of interface is important. And things like supporting the Kronos Group's OpenXR is a big part of the future, because we want to use standards that are interoperable, that everyone can use. And so we've had part of it already, where we've had the OpenXR standard be published on how we're implementing it inside of the Open3D engine. And you can find that in our GitHub repository as one of the RFCs that have been ratified, that they're moving forward with it. But understand that this hardware isn't just limited to your PC, it's also done on mobile device type hardware. And that also comes down when we're talking about augmented reality. So you've got your mobile phone, or you may have a set of see-through glasses that are VR, AR, where you're drawing an object onto a 3D surface that may have already been previously LiDAR scanned or is doing active LiDAR scanning. So having a 3D engine that understands how this works in OpenXR is a really critical piece to it. And then, of course, you have mixed reality on top of it, where you could be moving fluidly between all of the different spaces, having 3D and 2D, real life, actually show up in a single interface. And so this is important for working with standards to be able to accomplish this aspect of it. So with all of these interfaces and things that we've been talking about so far, one of the key aspects is mobile devices. And so we have a mobile device working group that we've actually formed. And the purpose behind that is to drive kind of mobile innovation and standardization. And we have some very strong supports to companies like Oppo, Heroic Labs, Huawei, Imagination, and Carbonated. And it's really striving to build portable libraries and interfaces that you can use across a myriad of different environments and devices. And many of you in China are already participating. So really, we want to invite everyone to become a part of this so that we can actually help build these standards. So no matter what device is being used, you know that your experience will be the same, and it will cut down the amount of work that needs to be done to actually unleash that kind of creativity on these devices. So it's part of getting involved in these type of areas. That's the key on growing these and having these become a really big part of the market in which we see today. So really, if you think about it, the future really is 3D immersive experiences. It's changing everything. It's changing the environments of what we're doing. We're seeing more and more of it. We don't have these flat interfaces. They're becoming more realistic. And as we move towards things like the metaverse, you're going to see a lot of these things continue to grow. What will it look like? Nobody truly knows. We all love the movies, but there's going to be stages that we need to get there. But what we do know is that 3D is indeed a part of it, because it's already a part of many of the things we do in life today. So really what it comes down is that, we believe that the vision of the Open3D Foundation, we're going to become a huge enabler for the industry in general, and a huge enabler for the upcoming digital future when we talk about the metaverse. And we want to make sure that we're on board with that from the start to help shape this future. This means having open source technology. This means having open standards that people continue to build upon, so that there are no restrictions that are coming from any one company or one environment. We want people to be able to build and innovate, and that is a core piece of what we're striving to do in open source. And this is what we're inviting all of you to be a part of around the globe. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's an amazing time for 3D, and we're looking forward to embracing all of you and having you become a part of us.